I grew up in a small college town, Lexington, Kentucky, and saw very little visual art. There was no museums, and really very few artists. So I was immersed in a world of books. My parents were great readers, and I constantly read, and my favorite writers, of course, were Southern Gothic. And that includes Flannery O'Connor, if you have ever read Wise Blood, which is quite amazing. That's a really good example. But my father was very interested in history, and I became interested in history as well. And one of my favorite writers is Tacitus, who wrote about the Roman Empire. And he has a quote that I've used many times that I'll probably not get entirely accurately, but every translation is different, of course. And he says, "My themes, on the other hand, are unremitting accusations, innocent men ruined, a monotonous glut of downfalls and their monotonous causes." So what he was doing is comparing his art, that of a historian, to the art of other historians who wrote about changing fortune of a battle, glorious commander. And I feel that's a good place to start because writers express these feelings so well. So my art has been discomforting, I would have to say, though not to me, to my viewers. I've had many, many conversations with people over the years that have said I was brave or I was foolish and that I would never sell my art under any circumstances, but that's never stopped me from doing it. One of my probably most discomforting works of art was a series, and I tend to work in a series which I call dark repetition. And this particular series was called The Musketeers in Iraq. And at that very time, there was a confluence of events that seemed disconnected, but they are quite connected. 9/11, the bombing of the World Trade Center, and American Idol, which started in 2002. Actually, it made me think about the Musketeers because in my childhood, the Musketeers, the search and selection of them was just as big as American Idol was in its original state. And I wanted to make really an anti-war statement, and as everything I do, things sort of develop strangely, but I did monstrous faces of the Musketeers and how they may look after being in Iraq for a while, and behind them I wrote stories of each individual, like Darlene and Tommy and Doreen, all the original Musketeers. And my work has continued in that vein since 2004 when I did this piece. Other series include 365 Dumb Days, which actually started in 1996 and in different forms has continued to this very day. And it's really about how technology has changed and the aging of the individual. Subsequent series have been about political power and how it changes, how celebrity changes over the years, how the people who are probably the most important people in our lives or the most visible in another generation will be totally invisible. And my most recent series is called Shadowland, that really gets into the darkness that's always behind us.
I have actually two backgrounds, Russian background and Israeli background. And in my art and in relation to discomfort, I'm talking and relating more to my Russian background. And specifically to impossibility of private space. I'm dealing with the private and public space in my art a lot. And how it actually relates to impossibility of private space. I was living a period when the communism was ending, and this period was really hard in a sense, and what it asked actually, it was asking more to be in a public space instead of having your private space. And it's always forced you to kind of be exposed, and after actually this period ended and perestroika started, so it was the idea of capitalism that suddenly appeared with the private property and the ability to have your actual space. But the problem is that the idea in people's head didn't change. That still they didn't have the trust and the belief in each other, which I think is really important in terms of private space. And yeah, so it was more like a shell than the real idea and of private space that appeared. So in my work, I relate to these things in terms of fictional space. I create my person fictional space to explain the personal thing. I actually use both the utopian and dystopian ideas, and I take parts from communist experience, and I take parts from domestic reality in my work Thresholds, for example, and I kind of create this incongruent space. Also, I relate to different artists and people who I was really inspired from, for example, Nabokov. I think for me it's a really good example of person who was able to push back all this totalitarian system, because in 1930s he was approached by KGB and was asked to be a spy actually, and he could receive a passport and go back to Soviet Union because he was in exile at that time in France. And he denied this possibility, and he decided to go to United States and to live there. And for him, the important thing was to create his own personal fictional space where he was able to summon the spies and the agents and to ask questions actually about this totalitarian system. The questions, what if? What if it could be this situation, and what if gonna change that way? So for me, it's a really good example. Another example of this feeling of discomfort and more in relation to how we live and how we experience actually the world now is Svetlana Boym. She passed away recently, and she was influencing me during these 2 years when I was in the grad school, and I really, really appreciate her. She coined the term called off-modern, which it actually relates to kind of combining and bringing together different periods and different times, and it's kind of a possibility not to go straight forward to the place where isms exist, but actually to find some kind of zigzags and the ways back, and it's also very, very influenced me in this term. I think it's a good idea how you can be displaced person and feel discomfort in a sense and still tackle somehow world in a way, in the terms of approaching it.
Well, I loved this word, and thinking about it, I thought about how discomfort is tied to the everyday, and that continually throughout your day you encounter discomforts, not being at ease, whether it's an encounter with a person or you know, some mishap that happens, and how just as a human being, you know, the stance that we take on discomfort, I think, really has a great effect on our lives and our sense of well-being or satisfaction and happiness. And I was also thinking about its relationship to growth. I mean, everyone knows this, that in order to grow, you have to have a threshold of discomfort. Otherwise, you stay safe, you know, you stay set and in that pattern. And as artists, I think cultivating discomfort in confronting the new, confronting uncertainty is something we just practice. And I guess I have found in my own work, I'm able to do that, yet in other areas of my life it's been more challenging. But I think I'm thinking about that a lot, you know, because by being triggered, that sense of unease or discomfort, we judge, we blame, we, you know, kind of keep things at bay in order for us just to feel comfortable. And Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun, I just finished one of her books. She said that we should never underestimate our low tolerance for discomfort as a species. And I guess in relationship to my work, I mean, I very much identified with Katy's talk about, in my early 20s, it was a very difficult time in my life. And I think my work became this place, you know, to figure out maybe more extreme discomfort or an understanding about that. And it was very personally based. And so I did, you know, continue to make work that was fictionalized, creating memories of very discomforting, uneasy situations. And then coming to New York and Brooklyn and being there at 9/11, there was definitely a shift in my work where, you know, that something which is really actually more extreme trauma not only happened to me, but happened to many. And I felt like a sense of being in history at a moment, and also felt like I had to grapple with that although it wasn't something like hugely affected me, it was in the air. That anxiety or grief or unease was in the air, and I wanted to kind of give visual form to that in my work. And I would say that continues.
I can completely relate to exactly what you were talking about in terms of discomfort, kind of pushing your boundaries a little bit, kind of helping you grow. I think anytime you come against something that really makes you feel uncomfortable, that's really where you have to look, because that actually hints to something that, you know, like Lacan or Zizek would say is like the real. It's something that you're kind of avoiding or you feel uncomfortable about. Once you start pushing yourself in that area, it will become very instructive about what your capabilities are or what your limitations are, or, you know, what your threshold in general is for life, for everything that you're going to experience. And thinking about this, I was thinking about like my own practice. I don't always thematize or make discomfort the primary thing, but I have done it at times specifically to create a sort of shock, or I would say a slow, gradual shock within the viewer, so that they can sort of be more self-reflective of what caused that and why they specifically are reacting that way to the stimulus. And when I think of discomfort, I think it's not just unease. It always has this psychological component that includes pain or some sort of psychological provocation. It's not just unease. Like, we can be sitting in unease at the moment, but it's something that really pushes you, triggers something that you want to generally avoid. And so I think when art sort of taps into that, it has to also answer a couple ethical questions, which I think are really, really important, because if you're intentionally trying to make the viewer uncomfortable, then it raises questions about, like, why are you trying to do that, and how are you doing it? Because if you don't have like a real reason of why you're trying to make them uncomfortable, the work sort of devolves into sadism or entertainment. And that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with entertainment, but I think having a sort of opportunity for reflection, for growth, for instruction, for insight, for catharsis, I think helps take art in a level beyond just what you experience in your everyday life. And I have a story for you. Speaking of discomfort, so I was on a subway station at Fulton Street earlier this year, and I was standing at the station waiting for the train. It was a crowded platform, and I was standing near a column. There was a guy that was leaning up against a column in a big trench coat, just kind of off to himself, seemed drunk, and he's just making these kind of like weird noises behind me, and then all of a sudden he just sort of breathes on the back of my neck. He goes, I thought it was really weird, right? I was like, I thought it was weird. And I looked behind, his eyes were glossed over, they were glassy, they were wet, and I just kind of thought, okay, he's drunk. And I didn't think anything of it, and he just said, sorry. And I was like, oh, it's fine, and then we had just a very brief conversation about the trains being delayed, platform being full. And then I picked up my backpack, which I had sitting on the ground next to me. I picked it up and I got on the train, and it wasn't until I later got off the train when I actually was putting on my backpack that I felt something kind of wet on the backpack. And then I looked over it, and I can't say with 100% certainty that it was ejaculation, but I'm pretty certain that that's what it was. And so why do I mention a story like this? It's because, so what if I told you that, and it's a true story, what if I told you that guy did it as a performance? He did it as an art project. How would that change the way you think about what happened and the horror I felt afterwards when I realized what had happened? I think that you could take that guy, you shove him under a raised platform, you make him say some words, and you put in a gallery, and suddenly you have Vito Conchi's seedbed. But you have to think about, like, kind of what is the end goal, or what's sort of the result? Why do you want to push people and make people feel uncomfortable? He was just obviously, disturbed in some capacity, but I think artists sometimes are maybe neglectful of the long-term effect of what you're going for. And so in my own work, I try to be very conscious of that when I do incorporate discomfort into it.
I hope I am an artist with an ethical relationship to discomfort, like, as you were saying. It seemed to me, in thinking about discomfort in relation to my work, that there's sort of two parts to it, two components to it, and that is my personal discomfort, or me putting myself into uncomfortable situations in the work. And then the other component is trying to provoke a discomfort in my audience, in the people viewing the work. And like you, I think that there is a responsibility, if you are doing that, if I'm doing a deliberately provocative image, I think that I do have a responsibility that it's there not just for provocation. That provocation actually is pretty easy, and that I have sort of larger fish to fry, in a sense, or larger issues that I hope to get at. So, for instance, back in the 80s, in the East Village art scene was just busting out, and it was really exciting. And a lot of the excitingness of the art world at that time, I thought anyway, came from young artists taking on subject matter that had not been approached before, or not in the previous generation anyway. And so they were for large part, taking on themes at how violent and gritty life is. And it just seemed like there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of this angst coming forth in these works. And it struck me that, that painting angst is actually pretty easy. I can get angst, I can sort of trigger angst, that feeling of angst in the painting pretty easily, but that I wanted to sort of get beyond that and to that how do you get beyond that angst? That's more difficult and more challenging and therefore more satisfying as an artist. And in terms of my feelings for myself on discomfort in making art, I'm actually oddly in a weird state where I'm trying to be comforting. I'm like in discomfort. I don't want to get to the other side and to be comfortable. That I think for all of us, it sounds like we challenge ourselves a lot. That if I did a drawing I like, and I sit down in front of a new piece of paper, I'm like, I'm not going to do that same drawing. That would be boring and so on. But I want to push myself to come up with something new, or somehow, and that is pushing oneself out of your comfort zone. And like you were saying earlier, in terms of kind of paradigms of reality and how it's almost a necessary step is to go into discomfort in order to come out, on the other side of with a new model or new paradigm. That's kind of required in a sense to change your patterns of thought and things. And I think that ultimately something that artists try to do is to make the world new again. So you're trying to see the world and depict something about it or say something about it that makes us see it in an unfamiliar way. That picture on the table, through Cezanne becomes unfamiliar, whereas it was just such an everyday object. And I think that journey kind of has to go through discomfort in a way. And so discomfort can be a great tool in trying to bring new thought.
I have a question. You started to talk about new thing, and it's interesting because I think it's always a tension between old and new, what you leave and what you take further with you. And every artist kind of tries to figure out it for him or herself. And what do you think about this tension? I'm really interested to ask.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the crux of it, isn't it? I mean, how do you... So I find it, in the process of painting, I find where I'm most uncomfortable, I think, is when I am trying to figure out maybe what I'm comfortable with. Where I'm trying to figure out where to push, I want to get beyond stuff that I've already done, or I'm trying to get beyond me, I guess, and to further explore this. But but it's so hard to say. I mean, it's hard to see yourself. I guess I think of it like it's hard to smell your own breath, because that's what you smell all the time. And so it's hard
it's too close.
Yeah, exactly. So it's this process of trying to distance yourself from yourself, which is kind of weird.
I was just thinking about how, in a way, you have to be, like, in a way, super comfortable with yourself, like have that state of things being okay, like enough heat or fat, and so that you can enter into that.
Oh, have the freedom to be uncomfortable, or
because if you go too discomforting, then it weirds, for me, it weirds you out. You can't stay focused.
Well, I find myself asking the question of myself. It's like, well, am I doing this just for effect?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just, I can.
I always try to
stick
catch
horns on someone's head,
that.
and like it's.
It's like how to do that thing.
Right.
once you know how to do it, it starts to be harder.
Well, you have to figure out why you want to do it too, you know?
Well, I was thinking about this notion.
That seedbed thing.
I was thinking about this notion of gratuitousness as well, like,
Right.
you know, doing something, you know, just gratuitously versus having that real deep intention with something that's provocative or puts you in a sense of unease.
Well, it's a weird balance, right? It's a fine balance because, like, you want to have some intention, but you don't want to have a controlled end. Like, you don't want, it's like you don't want to dictate what the ultimate experience is, but you want to have a sort of directed experience. Because if you have a sort of predetermined end, then it's almost like you're just filling out a script. It's almost routine.
Yeah, why even make it?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, actually,
it's already done.
kind of interesting.
Yeah.
In other areas that I work in, most people want the predetermined end, and they want a very controlled, regulated process to get to that end. So, you know, if I have a corporation, I make a product, and I want to know, oh, what's my marketing plan? What's my manufacturing sources and all that kind of junk? You know, it's sort of like.
But that's
Whereas artists like don't want that end,
Well,
you know.
no, I think a lot
well,
of
some
them
of us
do.
some do, but
Well, it becomes
yes.
more,
but that's a product.
marketable.
That's a product orientation. Whereas I think a true art orientation is like, no, I want to go on this journey. It's going to be a horrible, crazy journey through the woods and up the cliffs and stuff.